at least the following. The Baltic countries, terrible. The three little, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, awful. Hungary, very serious problems. Ireland, you've already heard. Greece, you've already heard. Portugal, Spain, Italy, Belgium, very, very bad situations. But, you know, there are serious problems in many other countries. Those are the worst. The amount of money, if you saw to the last couple of days paid, the Europeans are now thinking of setting up another new super agency with even more hundreds of billions or trillions of euros to bail these countries out because they all depend on it. These are all signs of a situation in Europe that is extremely problematical. And no one knows, again, what's going to happen. You are in a process, a long historical process of shifting the cost of this crisis off of the business community and onto the mass of people. And that is always a difficult process. The mass of people may at any time balk and stop. That's what the street riots were around in France. That's what the demonstrations, there have been 4 general strikes in Italy. Because Mr. Berlusconi controls the press there, Americans just didn't pick it up. There were those riots in England from the students. I mean, there's everywhere there are signs of the foment in the population. And I doubt that is going to not happen here. That is, it's coming. It'll take its own unique form here. It's a different country, has different traditions, but it'll happen here too and take its forms over time as Americans begin to realize that they're in for a long-term shift of the burden on to them. And I don't think these temporary fixes of the sort that were agreed to today are going to change this. If anything, they're going to make the lending community more and more uneasy about the dollar, uneasy about lending to the United States. The debts here are too big, they're growing, there's no sign of a political arrangement to deal with it. There's no willingness to tax the rich, we just saw that. There's no willingness to cut back on programs for the poor, we just saw that. So what are they going to do? They're exactly in the same situation that Greece was. It's just we're bigger, and so it'll take longer, and we're richer, but that's not very much of a comfort. Because what's happening in Greece is something that's happened. Belgium is the next country. Belgium's a relatively rich country, but Belgium is the next one to go in most people's estimate. They have their problems are enormous. They have borrowed money like there's no tomorrow. It's a little country, so it's an easier problem to solve. It's not a big country like Spain, but it's in serious trouble.
So what do people do? I mean, what's the what?
Let me just go. It's all right. Yeah.
You said there's no willingness to tax the rich. Would they let themselves be taxed? Could Papandreou actually tax the wealthiest Greeks?
Why didn't he do that?
I'm often asked this question. It's a good question, but the answer is politics. The answer is not economics. Can you tax the rich? The answer is no question. You can. Will the rich seek to escape it? That's sure too. Of course they will. But that's a very dangerous upping of the ante. If the Greek government goes through a parliamentary procedure and levies a tax on the rich, what exactly are they going to do? Move their wealth out of Greece? That'll be difficult, it'll take time, and they force the government's hand. Because if the government does nothing, then the gesture of taxing them becomes an empty gesture, and if that's the case, they wouldn't make the gesture in the first place. That makes no sense. So if the government's going to do it, it has to act. And the danger of the wealthy is, if the democratic procedures are to tax you, and you refuse, you are now positioning yourselves in a way that is dangerous for you to do, number one. Number two, if they have wealth outside the country, now what happens? Are the places where they have their wealth going to protect that wealth in the event of a legal procedure that mandates it comes back? Let me give you an example. The Swiss, who are arguably the ones who have for the longest time, until relatively recently, protected foreign wealth by allowing it to be hidden in Swiss bank accounts. I don't know how many of you follow it, but about a year ago, that all came to an end. It came to an end. And it came to an end when the United States basically said, we are going to begin to move criminal actions against Americans who have hidden wealth in your country. Even under your law, but even whether or not it's under your law, are you going to impede the legal proceedings of the United States? Because if you do, we will need to take action against you. Well, to make a long story short, that ended the Swiss protection of secrecy. It wasn't worth it for them. And you're going to now see a number of European countries, if this were to happen, because Greece wouldn't do it alone, to say to their rich people, okay, this is what you're going to have to do. If the rich people move their wealth away or don't bring their wealth home to comply with the law, then the European countries will go to whatever countries there are where this money is hidden and kept and present them with an offer they can't refuse. And they won't.
Well, they didn't do that, though, with Mitterrand in '81. In other words, when he tried to introduce social programs, tax the rich, there was an immediate outflow of money, which forced him to retreat.
Absolutely, and I would expect any government that tried that to have that same experience. So now this is all cat and mouse. Now what does a government do? Knowing what happened to Mitterrand, knowing what has happened to a number of other governments that have tried this from time to time. By the way, for those of you that are not familiar with it, the United States is beginning to move in that direction too, because it has concerns not about so much rich people, but there are concerns about anybody in the United States who's hiding income and not paying taxes through foreign accounts. So for example, until about 10 to 15 years ago, you did not have to tell the United States government about any account you had in a foreign country. 10 or 15 years ago, the IRS, little change in its rules, you have to tell them whether or not you have one. 6 or 7 years ago, you have to tell them on your income tax, not only whether you have one, but where you have it, and what bank it's in, and what the number of your account is. And 2 years ago, they changed it to give even more specifics about your account in a foreign country, such that it is a crime in the United States if you don't tell them. And now you're putting your wealth at risk. You are now, if over the last, I hope I'm not frightening anybody, over the last year, if you have an account in a bank outside the United States, and you did not file the form that you're required to file, it's a form of the United States Treasury. It has to be sent to the United States Treasury Office in Detroit, Michigan, by the 30th of June of each calendar year. If you didn't do that, you are now in violation of the law. And if the IRS finds it by leaning on the country where you have it, you're in trouble. That's a government that's already moving to be in the position of doing that. The United States government found out tens of thousands of accounts in Switzerland over the last 4 years that were secret. It found out who had them, and it found out how much was in them. It gave a tax amnesty. It said if you come forward and admit that you have this account in Switzerland, you will pay the taxes, but there'll be no penalty and there'll be no prosecution. But these are all little cat and mouse steps as a society feels itself in need of getting control. That's the same question as taxing the rich. They can't run forever, they can't run everywhere, and if there's any kind of concerted effort from wealthy countries, they'll get it.
But it's not illegal to move money out of the country, is it?
No, as long as you file the documentation about it. And that wasn't the case before. So I can open an account in France today, no problem. But I have to file that form. I have to tell the IRS when I did it, how much money is in the account, the name of the bank, the address of the bank, and the number of the account. At this point, it becomes child's play. The IRS will then communicate through the proper channels with the French government, and they will verify how much money you have, where it's going, who's drawing checks against it, where you paid it out to, whether you pay tax on it. If you have an account, I shouldn't be telling you this, if you have an account in France you can instruct the bank to buy and sell stock. So if you're an American, for example, if you buy shares of stock here in the United States, you get a dividend, you have to pay tax on it. Now suppose you have an account in the Société Générale in Paris. Okay? You instruct the Société Générale on your behalf to take your money and buy a share of the same company, GE. But in the accounts, it looks like a purchase by a French bank of a stock. That's not the business of the United States. There's no tax on the Société Générale for you. You escape your tax. But you're not allowed to do that. You have to file on your income tax that you got from the Société Générale a dividend from GE that went, and you pay tax on that.
No French taxes?
What?
No French taxes?
There may be a French tax as well, and you may have credits between the two countries to offset what you pay each of them. But the bottom line is, many Americans established accounts in these other countries precisely to own stock, earn dividends, make capital gains, and never pay tax in the United States. That was the point. They can't do that now. That is, they are violating the law, and they're going to get caught. Or at least the risk of getting caught is real. Much realer than it used to be, and that's a control. That's the first step. Will the private owners of shares find a new way? Of course they'll try to. And then the government, you see what's going on here? You change the game. It's now the government hunting them down. That's a new situation. Up until now, they've had a free ride.